Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. You might know Edgar Allan Poe from poems like The Raven, or short stories like The Telltale Heart. But you might not know there was one other thing Poe was almost as proud of as he was of his writing. It was his swimming. And in fact, today, Poe holds a record for swimming against the tide in the James River. But did he really do it? We'll find out on tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. So check this out. This is a copy of the Southern Literary Messenger magazine here in Richmond, where Poe worked from about March of 1835 until early 1837. But before he started working there, in the January 1835 issue, there was an article written by a fellow going by the name of Benedict. We don't know his real name. And he wrote, actually it's right here. One evening in June 1832, when the thermometer stood at 94 degrees, I had managed to convey myself about a mile up the river for the purpose of bathing and going into the water. I splashed about with great vigor, thinking about Leander's remarkable feat in crossing the Hellespont, until I felt a great desire to try whether I might not aspire to equal it, or at least E.P., who swam from Mayo's Bridge to Warwick some years ago. So who is this E.P.? Who do we know in Richmond, Virginia, who grew up here and swam the James River with the initials of E.P.? Well, apparently, Edgar Poe saw this article. And a few months later, he wrote to the owner of the magazine, Thomas White, and told him, "That's me, I'm E.P., I did that." And White decided to print a portion of Poe's letter in the May 1835 issue of the magazine. It's right in here. I noticed the allusion in the dune. The writer seems to compare my swim with that of Lord Byron, whereas there can be no comparison between them. Any swimmer in the falls of my days would have swum the Hellespont and thought nothing of the matter. I swam from Ludlam's Wharf to Warwick 6 miles in a hot June sun against one of the strongest tides ever known in the river. It would have been a feat comparatively easy to swim 20 miles in still water. I would not think much of attempting to swim the British Channel from Dover to Calais. So here Poe's saying, yeah, that's me. Everybody knows it's me. I'm the one who swam 6 miles against the tide in the James, and it was easy. But Poe didn't let it rest there. Just 5 years later, when he's living in Philadelphia, he wrote an article for Alexander's Weekly Messenger. Although he didn't put his name on it, we kind of know he did it, because he's writing a notice about a famous swimmer who's made some extraordinary swims, and he's just died. So Poe is writing to say, yeah, his swim is nothing compared to this guy back in Richmond, Virginia, I know, named Edgar Poe, who writes for the Gentleman's Magazine, which was another magazine for which Poe was writing at the time. And Poe says, a far more extraordinary one is within our knowledge, and within that of almost every resident of Richmond in Virginia. Mr. Poe, now the Gentleman's Magazine, swam from a point in James's River called Ludlam's Wharf to a wharf at Warwick, a distance of 7.5 miles in a hot June sun and against a tide of 3 miles per hour. He was then but 15 years of age. There is no properly authenticated fact on record equal to that of Mr. Poe. At the time of its performance, this fact was conceded by almost every journal in the United States. Well, I can't verify that it's the most extraordinary swimming feat that ever happened, like Poe does, or even that newspapers all over the place picked up the story, which they didn't. And also, there's one more thing. Did you notice that? In that first account, he said it was 6 miles. Now we're up to 7.5 miles. The swim just keeps getting longer and longer. But Poe's not done yet. 3 years later, in a Philadelphia newspaper called the Saturday Museum, we've got a copy of it right here. This is just a reprint of it. They ran a profile right on the front page about Poe, who's just starting to get renowned as a writer. He's published the first detective stories, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Mystery of Rue Auger. He's published The Telltale Heart, and also some of his great early poems. And this article showers him with praise, saying what an extraordinary, intelligent, and imaginative writer he is. But then way down here in the last paragraph, he makes a mention of his swimmer, or at least the writer of this article, whose source was Poe, makes a mention of Poe's swimming feats in the James River. Way at the end here. In his youth, Poe was noted for gymnastic feats to an extent almost beyond the credible, and it is believed that to this day he remembers such achievements with greater pride than any subsequent mental triumphs. So he's prouder of his swimming than anything else he's ever done. At one period, he is known to leap the distance of 21 feet 6 inches on a dead level, and with a run of 20 yards. A most remarkable swim of his is also on record in the columns of the Richmond Enquirer and other Richmond papers. It took place in his 15th year. He swam on a hot July day with a 3-knot tide on Ludlam's Wharf on the James River to Warwick, a distance of 7 miles and a half, fully equal to 30 miles in still water. The impossibility of resting even for a moment by floating in a task such as this renders it Herculean, and the feat has never been equaled by anyone. So how do you like that? Poe is calling himself Herculean in his athletic abilities. But this wasn't the last mention we have. Right down here. In their international magazine, there's an article from 1850, the year after Poe's death, by Rufus Griswold, a guy who didn't really like him that much, but he concedes that Poe was an extraordinary swimmer. Even though otherwise Griswold thinks he's an awful human being, Griswold did say right here, incredible swimmer. At this period, he was noted for feats of hardihood, strength, and activity, and on one occasion, on a hot day of June, he swam from Richmond to Warwick 7 miles and a half against a tide running probably from 2 to 3 miles an hour. And then at the bottom, there's a little footnote. This statement was first printed during Mr. Poe's lifetime, and its truth has been questioned in some of the journals. The following certificate was published by a distinguished gentleman of Virginia. I was one of several who witnessed the swimming feat. We accompanied Mr. Poe in boats. Messrs. Robert Stannard, John Lyle, since dead, Robert Saunders, John Munford, I think, and 1 or 2 others were also of the party. Mr. P did not seem at all fatigued and walked back to Richmond immediately after his feat, which was undertaken for a wager. And it's signed Robert G. Cabell. So Poe got his friends, the people who were with him at the time, to sign affidavits declaring that this really happened, and Cabell here wasn't the only one. We also found records of another guy, Dr. Creed Thomas, who in his obituary right here says that he was one of the boys who swam in the James River, setting that 7.5-mile record. And that he in fact said he's signed an affidavit swearing to that fact. And others of Poe's classmates came forward over the years, swore to the fact that they'd been there. Another one of them was David Bridges. And check this out. This is a little photograph of Poe that David Bridges owned, and he probably got this directly from Poe's little sister Rosalie, who sold copies of this very picture about 20 or so years after Poe died. And on the back it says, this is written in the handwriting of his granddaughter, they were intimate friends and schoolmates and went on the famous swimming match together. So the owner of this was one of those kids who went swimming with Poe. In fact, he later did an interview with the Richmond State around the turn of the century, and he gave a lot more details. So that's how we're able to piece together what this swim was like. So here's what we know. It was a hot June or July day when a kid made the mistake of betting Poe that he couldn't swim 4 miles against the tide, that direction in the James River. Poe took him on that bet, and before you know it, a bunch of kids from Poe's school started out right back here on Mayo's Island and all took off heading this direction. Now, Poe's headmaster, rather than discouraging such potentially dangerous activities, decided to follow them in his rowboat just in case somebody drowned. He could maybe rescue them at the last possible second. By the time the kids got here to Rocket's Landing, this was about as far as they could go. Kids were dropping out left and right, except for Poe. Now, Rocket's Landing here is as far as the ships could come from the Chesapeake Bay before the river got too shallow and too rocky. And at one point it said that the water here was so shallow that day that when he got to a sunken ship, Poe just crawled over the top of it and hopped back in on the other side. And he kept going that way, another 2 or 3 miles. And Poe kept swimming all the way back there to Warwick on the James, a little village that's not there anymore. Now it's part of the Richmond Deepwater Terminal. And after that long journey, Poe was the only one to manage to finish it. He came out of the water exhausted, red as a lobster, blistered from sunburn. He pulled himself up on the shore and told everybody, "I'll walk the 6 miles back to Richmond." And at that, his headmaster finally did the responsible thing and said, "Just get back in the boat and ride back with everybody else." And thus concluded Poe's famous swim against the James River tide. So what do you think? Did he really do it? I'm leaning towards, yeah, he did it. We've got witnesses who said they were with him, but what exactly he did, that's the question. I don't think he swam 7.5 miles. It looks like it was closer to 6. And we can't verify what the tide was that day or how strong it was. So he did swim a pretty long distance, which is a pretty good feat. Even in still water. I wouldn't try it. But incidentally, somebody did try to beat the record. He came here and boasted that he was here to beat Poe's swimming record. He said he had all the gear and the swim fins and everything, and we never heard from him again. Maybe he got to Rocket's Landing and gave up? Or maybe he's catfish food. What do you think? Let us know down in the comments. Did Poe really make this amazing swimming feat? And if you'd like to help us preserve precious Poe pieces, like this rare early photograph of Poe owned by one of his closest friends, why not support the Poe Museum or become a member at poemuseum.org. And until next time, thanks for joining us, and I'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats doing cat stuff.